What if I told you that somewhere in a forgotten psychiatric ward in 1953, doctors discovered a woman who could recite the complete life stories of strangers with terrifying accuracy, yet couldn't remember her own name? What if I told you she knew intimate details about people she'd never met, could describe childhood memories that weren't hers, and spoke in voices that belonged to the dead? Today, we dive into one of the most disturbing and unexplained cases in psychiatric history, a case so bizarre that it was buried in classified files for 70 years. This is the story of Patient 47, the woman who became a living archive of human memories while losing every trace of herself. The rain hammered against the windows of Riverside State Hospital that October night when they brought her in. She wore a tattered white dress, her feet bare and bleeding, her dark hair matted with mud. The police had found her wandering the cemetery at 3 a.m, kneeling beside a stranger's grave, whispering intimate details about a life that had ended 50 years before she was born. They called her Patient 47 because she couldn't tell them her name. She couldn't tell them where she lived, who her family was, or even what year it was. But she could tell them everything else. Everything about everyone else. Dr. Margaret Whitmore was the first psychiatrist to interview her. What she discovered would haunt her for the rest of her career. When shown a photograph of a deceased patient from the hospital's archives, Patient 47 began speaking in a completely different voice. She described childhood summers in rural Alabama, a pet dog named Chester, and the taste of her grandmother's apple pie. These weren't delusions or fantasies. Hospital records confirmed every single detail she mentioned about this stranger's life. But it got stranger, much stranger. Over the following weeks, Patient 47 demonstrated an ability that defied all medical understanding. She could absorb the memories of anyone she encountered. A single touch, a brief conversation, even just looking at someone's photograph, and she would gain complete access to their entire life story. She knew things people had never told anyone. Secret shames, forgotten dreams, traumatic experiences, buried so deep that even the subjects themselves had forgotten. The nursing staff began to fear her. She would greet them by name before introductions, ask about their sick relatives, mention childhood pets that had died decades ago. One nurse quit after Patient 47 described, in perfect detail, a miscarriage she'd suffered in silence 20 years earlier. Dr. Whitmore documented everything. Her notes, discovered in the hospital's basement archives in 2020, reveal a case that challenges everything we understand about human consciousness and memory. Patient 47 wasn't just remembering other people's lives, she was living them. She would spend entire days speaking as different people, adopting their mannerisms, their accents, their fears and desires. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. As Patient 47 collected more and more memories, she began to disappear. Not physically, but mentally. The overwhelming flood of other people's experiences was drowning out whatever remained of her original self. She would sometimes spend weeks unable to speak because she couldn't determine which voice was truly hers. Dr. Whitmore became obsessed with helping her patient recover her own identity. She tried hypnosis, drug therapy, even experimental procedures that would be considered barbaric today. Nothing worked. Patient 47 could recite the life stories of hundreds of people with perfect clarity, but her own past remained completely blank. The breakthrough came by accident. During a particularly intense session, Patient 47 suddenly began convulsing. Her eyes rolled back, and she started speaking in a voice no one had heard before. It was younger, frightened, unmistakably her own. For 37 minutes, she remembered. What she revealed made Dr. Whitmore burn her notes and seal the case forever. Patient 47 had been born Sarah Collins in 1928. She'd grown up in a small town outside Chicago with her parents and younger brother. But when she was 12 years old, something happened. Something so traumatic that her mind shattered completely, creating a defense mechanism unlike anything ever documented in medical literature. Her father, a respected doctor in their community, had been conducting illegal experiments on patients in his private clinic. Sarah had discovered the truth one night when she snuck into his office. She'd seen the bodies, the failed procedures, the journals documenting years of torture disguised as medical research. But what broke her wasn't just the discovery of her father's crimes, it was realizing that she'd been helping him all along for years. Her father had been using Sarah's natural empathy and intelligence to understand his victims better. He would have her spend time with patients before their procedures, learning their fears, their weaknesses, their deepest secrets. Sarah thought she was helping people. She didn't understand that she was gathering information to make their suffering more exquisite. The night she learned the truth, Sarah's mind performed the ultimate act of self-preservation. It erased itself completely, leaving behind only the ability that had made her so valuable to her father, the power to absorb and contain other people's memories. She became a living repository for everyone except herself. Dr. Whitmore's final notes, written the night before she destroyed the case file, contain a chilling observation. Patient 47 didn't lose her memory. She chose to forget, and, perhaps, in a world where such evil exists, forgetting is the only way to survive. Patient 47 died in the hospital in 1968. She never remembered her name again. But the staff reported something strange in her final days. She began speaking about people who hadn't died yet, describing lives that wouldn't be lived for decades to come. She talked about technologies that didn't exist, places that hadn't been built, events that wouldn't happen until the 21st century. The woman who remembered every life except her own had somehow begun remembering lives that hadn't been lived yet. The case of Patient 47 remains one of the most disturbing and inexplicable stories in psychiatric history. Dr. Whitmore took her secrets to the grave, dying in 1991 without ever speaking publicly about her most famous patient. The hospital was demolished in 1965, and all official records of Sarah Collins were destroyed. But sometimes, late at night in psychiatric wards around the world, nurses report meeting patients who seem to know too much. Patients who greet them by name before introductions, who ask about relatives they've never mentioned, who whisper secrets that should have died with their original owners. They say memory is what makes us human. But what happens when we remember too much? What happens when the weight of everyone else's life becomes too heavy to bear? And what happens when the only way to survive is to forget who you are completely? Patient 47 found the answer to these questions, but it came at a price too terrible to imagine. Losing herself completely in order to save what remained of her sanity. The next time you look in the mirror and remember who you are, remember Sarah Collins, the woman who carried the memories of hundreds but never found her way back to her own reflection. Sometimes, the greatest tragedy isn't forgetting. Sometimes, it's remembering too much.